Today, we're going on one of our unbound walks, and it's a little bit different. It's outside of London, away in the beautiful Somerset countryside. We're going to be starting from Glastonbury, climbing the Tor, which is the iconic image of Glastonbury, and then walking down some leafy country lanes and narrow little permissive walkways to get to Gog and Magog, two trees that have been here for over 1,000 years and are probably the remnants of an ancient druid route. We're entering from the south side. As you see behind us here is the town of Glastonbury, and the hill in the distance there is Wiriel Hill, which is where the Holy Thorn was supposed to have been planted, but we'll come back to that, I'm sure. To make our way up the Tor, it's hard to see from close up, but from a distance you can see slumping, geological sliding of the hill. And we walk up this rather steep path, but there are steps, it's not impassable. That hill there, reefed with trees, is Chalice Hill, and bottom of Chalice Hill is the Chalice Spring, which you do have to get into that one, but the White Spring is on the opposite side of the road, and that's free of charge. You can fill up, and so long as you don't take pictures you can go inside. There's a little temple there. But we're continuing on, we're nearly at the top of the hill. It is quite steep, made up of clay and blue lias, and it rises above the Somerset levels, which used to flood many years ago as a seasonal sea. Think of it more as a swamp. But now it's been somewhat drained. If you look over the fields, you can see that the fields have very straight sides, and a lot of them actually have channels which drain into the river Brew, which carries away the moisture from the soil. But continuing up to the top, nearly there. Must admit, I'm glad the sound wasn't on. I was a little bit out of breath. It is quite steep. And here is the Tor. The Tor is actually a tower. It's the tower of an old church built in 1725, I believe, St. Michael's Church. And it was demolished in an earthquake. So the people of Glastonbury picked this as the spot to drag stone 518 foot up into the air to build a small church that dominated the landscape. Church was actually destroyed in 1275. It had been built about 100 years before that, and there appears to be a hermitage up there, which does make some sense of selecting this location, as it is a little bit removed from civilization. But on the 11th of September 1275, a very large, by British standards, earthquake struck. The epicenter was actually somewhere around Portsmouth, and it appears to have been a 7 on the Medvedev scale, so way more than you'd normally get in England. And it was felt as far away as Canterbury and London, and it brought down St. Michael's Church. Now, quite often people say that the church has never been rebuilt, but if you look at that tower, does that really look like a tower from 1275? No, the whole church came down, and it was rebuilt and maintained right up until 1539 and the dissolution of the monasteries. And Glastonbury Abbey was one of 3 abbeys where they refused the dissolution of the monasteries, and the abbot was executed on the order of Henry VIII. The others accepted and moved away from the abbeys, but Glastonbury was, as a result, largely destroyed at the time, and the abbot was executed in town square. So now we're at the top. We're going to take a slower pace and have a little look around. There you can see the Mendip Hills in the distance there. If you watch our video on the Deer Leap Standing Stones, they're roughly in front of us there. And that's the Glastonbury Reservoir. You can see the path down the back that we're going to be following. But it really is a spectacular view. And when the sun rises, it rises over that horizon there. And when it sets between the hills on the other side by Wells and Cheddar and Weston-super-Mare. Really is spectacular. It's a wonderful place to watch the sunset. And you can see it's a magnet that draws people from around Britain and the world to come and stand on Glastonbury Tor. But we're actually heading to somewhere a little bit less visited, and I can tell you, unless you're walking, quite difficult to get to. You really don't want to try to drive there. I've done that and I'm not doing that again. So we're going to walk to Gog and Magog, two ancient trees. Before we do, let's have a little look inside St. Michael's Tower, and you can see the ancient structure. Clearly not an early Norman church, clearly much later than the 1275. Wouldn't be at a loss in English churchyard from the Middle Ages. Now heading down the back, trying to squeeze past everyone on what is a pretty narrow path. Last view of the tower. But we're going to go all the way back down to the rear of the hill, and there's a bell, Bridley Bell. You can actually park next to the bell, but I would warn you that there's about 3 car parking spaces and one's disabled, and there's a bus that stops there as well for locals, so I would say you'll be quite lucky to get a parking space there. But it is easier to walk up the hill from the rear here. I don't know if you can make out those ridges in the edge of the hill. Some people have suggested slipping. There was actually a suggestion in the 1960s that it was a Neolithic labyrinth, a geometrical pattern deliberately constructed for unknown, probably ritualistic purposes. But there isn't really evidence to support quite how it was formed. And it's now National Trust, so we won't be digging it up to find out. But down the bottom, a rather easy path down here to the Bridley Bell. I would go and have a look at the Bridley Bell, but there was a few people camping there who seemed very firmly ensconced and were enjoying a little tipple, so I left them to it. Then we turn right onto Stone Down Lane, and you reach a junction. It's straight ahead, but it's the one that's slightly to the left, if that makes sense, because at this point there isn't actually a clear sign. But it's an easy path. It's actually a car accessible road, but you can see how keen you would be to drive down here and have to overtake a car. We go past a farmyard, and you really are way out in the country now. You wouldn't think you were less than a mile from Glastonbury, probably half a mile. And there's a few ways over to Gog and Magog, but we're going to turn down this permissive pathway. And you can see it is a narrow, it felt narrower than it looks on the video, but it's an ancient pathway which has been in use for many centuries. Britain is crisscrossed with these walkways and pathways, ridgeways and rights of way that are protected by law. And this one goes through the farmer's field. There is a bull who was quite intrigued what we're up to, but seemed fairly friendly. And you start to see the landscape appearing before you. If I turn around, you can actually see Glastonbury Tor quite clearly. And you can see some beautiful hills to the side. And as we crest the brow of this hill, there's a hedge ahead of us where you have to find the opening. And then the next row of hedges is where we're going. It's about a mile from the base of Glastonbury Tor to Gog and Magog. So Gog and Magog, two very ancient trees. They're a pair of names that are in the Old Testament, they're in the Bible, the Quran. And Gog's an individual and Magog is a land in Ezekiel. But by the New Testament revelations, Gog and Magog had become Gog from Magog. Their origin is lost from time, but they actually appear in Christian, Jewish, Islamic, Norse, even Zoroastrian religion. So there's something lost deep in time that Gog and Magog come from. Can you see that tree in the middle, that large white stump? That's Gog. Together they're called the Oaks of Avalon because this area is the Isles of Avalon. And it's believed they were part of a ceremonial avenue leading to Glastonbury Tor. But the avenue was cut down as late as 1906. They were making a farm and the farmer cut them down. And when they did, and they cut through the trees, they counted 2,000 season growth rings in one of the trees. Historically, it's believed that Joseph of Arimathea followed the row of trees towards the Tor when he arrived in Albion. But unfortunately, later people lacked the civilization and sense to keep trees that are thousands of years old, and they were cut down so that we could put cows on the land. But these two trees survived. Gog actually died in 2017, and it's now being fenced in because it died and then it set on fire. Someone put a candle in there. There's always a degree of ritualism and spiritualism around Glastonbury, and clearly someone was meaning well but sadly caused harm to the tree. So the tree is long gone and dead, but it's been preserved. And although the legal protection which a 1,000-year-old tree has ran out when it died, the landowners of the caravan park behind have fenced it in and preserve it and try and keep it. Next to it is Magog, which it's really hard to tell which bits are alive and which bits are dead. It's still a thriving oak tree. 2/3 of it is probably now dead and no longer in use because it has warped and grown so much. But it really is a spectacular sight to see a tree that stood for so long. Two trees that some sources say were the ceremonial entrance to Avalon, the beginning of this avenue of oaks. We really don't know how long they go back. There have been suggestions of avenues of trees planted back in the Neolithic, the same as the avenue of stone at Avebury. But there is something very special and unique about Gog and Magog, and that's why I wanted to bring you here today to share this little beautiful spot that you don't really get to see very often. And if you do go to Glastonbury, by the time you've seen the Tor and the museum and the tribunal, the abbey, walked around the hills, put your feet in the spring, drunk some of the spring water, preferably from a different pool, then you probably don't get time to go to Gog and Magog. And it is quite unique in Britain, two trees with such a history and a mythology. So hopefully you've enjoyed joining us and going to Gog and Magog. And I would encourage you to walk around in Somerset. It is a beautiful part of the world. And wherever you are here, as you walk back to town, or even 15 miles away on top of a hillside, or driving into Glastonbury from street or from direction of Wells, or even from London direction, you really can't miss Glastonbury Tor rising like a needle out of the Tor. It's a beautiful spot, and it attracts people not just because it's pretty and it makes a good photo and it's one of the must-do things on Instagram when you're in Glastonbury, but also because there's a long-standing tradition of spirituality and presence, and that the hill lays on ley lines, and that Joseph of Arimathea and some of Jesus' disciples came here. It's even enshrined in Blake's poem Jerusalem. This is where those feet tread. So I hope you enjoyed our walk, and please do like and subscribe. It helps a lot. And come back next week for more Unbound Histories, walks and museum tours. And we'll try to show not just the significant and famous places, but also the beautiful little spots that maybe are a little bit too forgotten, like Gog and Magog.